plunge right back into this study here. We're on the Harmony of the Gospels, part 22. We'll start this one in Matthew 8. Matthew 8 and verse 18. But when Jesus saw great multitudes around him, he commanded his disciples to depart to the other side. And a certain scribe came to him and said, Master, I will follow you wherever you may go. Then Jesus said to him, Foxes have holes, and birds of heaven have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. Now, why would he say that? I'm going to have some input today, right? Yeah. Would this man really do that? The road Jesus was on was a very difficult one for normal everyday people with their own lives to live, wasn't it? He traveled to and fro, didn't have an actual job. He didn't have a wife and kids to worry about. And if someone was going to follow him, they would have to do the same, which means pretty much give up your life. Which is a noble thing to do in Jesus' service, especially the disciples that were there. But was this man really prepared for that? That's why Jesus says, foxes have holes and birds of heaven have nests. The Son of Man has no place to lay his head. I mean, there's no home, there's no house for him to go to after the day's work is done. There's no normal life for him. Is this expected of us? That kind of thing? Obviously not. Right? Jesus is not here right now traveling to and fro. But the point in our life today is that God must be top priority in our life. Must be. Right? That's why we come. Right? We're supposed to be here on the Sabbath to learn about God. Imagine everyone leaving everything to go on the road and preach. There would be no one at any destination to preach to because everybody would be on the road doing the same thing, right? That doesn't sound logical. But there are some ministers that do travel a lot. But they still have their own home. Do they not? Sure they do. Verse 21, and another of his disciples said to him, Lord, allow me first to go and bury my father. But Jesus said to him, follow me and leave the dead to bury their own dead. Does that make sense? Follow me and leave the dead to bury their own dead. How do the dead bury their own dead? And why does it seem that Jesus doesn't have compassion on this man to go and tend to his father? Curious, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Any thoughts on why? Well, what's probably more logical here is that this man's father was not yet dead. If he was dead, what was he doing there with Jesus? Right? If this man's father was already dead, he would be tending to him right now, wouldn't he? And burying him. So it's more logical that this man's father is probably sick and expected to die, and this man wanted to go and be with his father while he was dying, however long that would take, and then bury him when he did die. And how long would that take? And you can understand that, because wouldn't you want to be with your father when he's in that state? But remember, this was a disciple asking, right? Or a disciple asking. And what did Jesus say to that certain scribe? about what was important. You have to put God first. And this was a disciple here asking this question. And you can understand that, because I want to be with my father when he's in that state and about to die. Who knows how long it would take, a month, a week. But as a disciple, he was already expected to have left his life behind. When you're on the road with Jesus, anything could happen to your family, including them dying. And you weren't expected to rush back home and tend to that matter, because something else is more important. This ministry that Jesus was on and his disciples, their first responsibility was to him, not to his Father. And about the dead burying the dead. That doesn't seem to make sense, does it? A better reading of this would probably be, let the spiritually dead, because they don't understand yet. Their mission in life is to, right now, to continue with their lives, live their lives, work their jobs, look after their families, bury their dead. Jesus is telling this man, it is better for you, because you're my disciple, to follow me doing God's work than to go and sit around at home waiting for your father to die. There's something more important that you are called to do right now, because you are my disciple. And it's a great sacrifice to have to do that. You don't even have a place to rest your head. You don't have a place to call home. And we're not expected to do that today, because none of us are disciples of Jesus Christ in the same way that these guys are disciples that have to travel with Jesus to and fro. And that's what their calling is at this time. Of course, we're supposed to tend to our families, but we have to make certain that God comes first. That we respect the Sabbath day too. Curious question here is, why didn't this disciple ask Jesus to heal his father? I have no idea myself, but it's a curious question. Do you suppose if the disciple asked that of Jesus, that Jesus would grant that? That's a logical assumption, but that's not even brought up here. It's a curious observation that I had when I was going through this. And when he entered into the ship, his disciples followed him. Now I'm going to skip between Luke and Mark and Matthew. So I'm going to keep my finger in the different pages here, so I can do that. It'll be Luke 8, and I'll also have Mark 4. Okay. I got to bounce around between these three different Gospels here. Luke 8:22. Now it came to pass on one of those days that he and his disciples went into a ship, and he said to them, "Let us go over to the other side of the lake." And they put off from the shore. Now, notice what Jesus told them. Let us go over to the other side of the lake. That's Jesus' intention, is to go to the other side of the lake. That's what he wants to do. Mark 4, verse 35. Now on the same day is when Jesus had finished talking about the parables of the kingdom, by the way. When evening came, he said to them, "Let us go over to the other side." There's the intent, to go over to the other side. And after dismissing the multitude, they took him with them, and he was already in the ship. And there were many other small ships with him also. And a violent windstorm came up, and the waves were crashing into the ship so forcefully that it was rapidly filling up. Now he, Jesus, was at the stern, sleeping on a cushion. And they roused him and said to him, Master, don't you care that we are perishing? First off, how can anyone possibly sleep through a violent storm like that on a ship? Jesus obviously did. And he was obviously unconcerned about the storm also, wasn't he? Totally unconcerned about it. Because what was his intention to do?
Get to the other side.
Get to the other side. So do you not think that Jesus' intention was to get to the other side, that he would get there? Because he had what?
Faith.
Faith. Very good. He had faith in the Father because that was the intention, that was God's will for him to go to the other side and do something very important, which we'll see. So he was unconcerned about this. What about the disciples? They woke him up from his sleep and they asked him, don't you care that we are perishing, that we're dying? The storm is so bad that we literally can sink. The boat's filling up. What did they display there when they knew Jesus' intent was to get to the other side? Lack of faith. Unbelief. They didn't have trust that they were going to get there safely. Now they had just finished hearing all those parables about the kingdom, and Jesus had taught them privately all about them. They had a lot of knowledge about God's word, and yet what about their faith and their belief? I call that something like active faith. Active faith is something that you can see a result of. They displayed not much active faith, and we'll see this as we're going through. And after being awakened, he rebuked the wind and said to the sea, Silence, be still. And the wind died, and there was a great calm. Notice the word rebuked the wind. I'll come back to that after, but keep that in mind. He rebuked the wind. And in Luke 8, we'll read about this too. And as they sailed, he fell asleep. And a windstorm came down on the lake, and they were being filled with water, and were in danger. Then they came to him and awoke him, saying, Master, Master, we are perishing. And he arose and rebuked the wind and the raging of the water, and they ceased, and there was a calm. Immediately there was a calm, that quickly. And then in Matthew 8, verse 24, now a great tempest, that's pretty violent, suddenly arose in the sea, and that does happen on the Sea of Galilee, so great that the ship was being covered by the waves, but he was sleeping. How can anybody sleep through that? That's incredible, right? But he was so assured that he was going to get to the other side that he was unconcerned about it. But still, how do you sleep through that? It would definitely wake me up, that's for sure. And his disciples came to him and awoke him, saying, Lord, save us, we are perishing. And he said to them, Why are you afraid, O you of little faith? Then he arose and rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was a great calm. Why are you afraid? I'd be afraid if I didn't have any faith in God. I mean, and I was on that lake with that kind of a storm. I'd be afraid because you literally could sink and die. He points out to them that you shouldn't be afraid of this. You're not displaying much faith. I told you before we got on this ship, we're going to the other side. But the men were amazed, saying, "What kind of man is this, that even the winds and the sea obey him?" Mark 4, verse 40. And he said to them, "Why are you so fearful? Why do you not have faith?" But they were afraid, and said to one another in great fear, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" They knew he was the Son of God, and yet they had trouble understanding this. They had a lot of unbelief even still. And Jesus marveled at that even after all this time they could still have such little faith. Luke 8, verse 25, and he said to them, "Where is your faith?" But they were afraid and wondered, saying to one another, "Who then is this that commands even the winds and the water, and they obey him?" In these recordings, it's recorded a little differently in each one. Jesus says, "You of little faith," in Matthew. And in Mark he says, "Why do you not have faith?" And in Luke it was, "Where is your faith?" He probably said all of that in this, and it was all recorded. He gave him a talking to. There was probably more involved in this. But it all had to do with their faith. The disciples had been well taught by Jesus. Think about those parables of the kingdom that Jesus had privately explained to all of them. They therefore had much knowledge of the truth, but did they have much active faith? No. If they had active faith, they themselves could have asked the Father to rebuke the winds, could they not? You're sent to go 2 by 2 to go and preach and heal the sick and cast out demons, were they not? So the Father would hear their prayer and calm the sea. Would they not? Or would God not? And notice in Matthew, it's Matthew 8, the same chapter. Earlier in that chapter, about the centurion. I'll read that over one more time. Chapter 8 of Matthew, verse 7. And Jesus said to him, "I will come and heal him." It's about the centurion. But the centurion answered and said, "Lord, I am not worthy that you should come under the roof of my house. But speak the word only, and my servant shall be healed. For I also am a man under authority, having soldiers under me, and I say to this one, 'Go,' and he goes, and to another one, 'Come,' and he comes, and to my servant, 'Do this,' and he does it." Now when Jesus heard these words, he was amazed, and he said to those who were following, "Truly I say to you, nowhere in Israel have I found such great faith." This centurion had greater faith than even his disciples did. Before the storm came and before he fell asleep, he told the disciples that they were going to go over to the other side of this lake, or the Sea of Galilee. How could a simple matter such as a violent storm being a simple matter. You ever seen a violent storm? There's no simple matter there, but to God, that's a simple matter. How could such a thing like a violent storm stop the will of God? A simple storm can't stop the will of God. Jesus intended to go to the other side. He wanted to go to the other side, and he was going to get there because he knew the Father would protect him. He had faith that the Father would protect him. Jesus was so confident, being in God's hands, that he was literally sleeping during the storm. And make no mistake either, a sudden tempest on the Sea of Galilee is a very real, dangerous, and terrifying thing. Right? If you're out there in the middle of this, it's very real, very dangerous. And the disciples were not only worried, they outright panicked. They were terrified. They thought they were going to die. Even though Jesus was with them and had told them that they were going to be going to the other side, where was their faith? Jesus knew that the Father would keep them safe. I want to read something from Psalms 89. Psalms 89, beginning in verse 1. I will sing of the mercies of the Lord forever. With my mouth I will make known your faithfulness to all generations. For I have said, your steadfast love shall be built up forever. You shall establish your faithfulness in the heavens. I have made a covenant with my chosen. I have sworn to David my servant. Your seed I will establish forever and build up your throne to all generations. And the heavens shall praise your wonders, O Lord, your faithfulness also in the congregation of the saints. For who in the heavens can compare with the Lord? Who among the mighty is like the Lord? God is greatly to be feared in the congregation of the saints and to be held in reverence by all who are about him. O Lord, God of hosts, who is mighty like you? O Lord, and your faithfulness is round about you. You rule the raging of the sea. When its waves arise, you still them. God has the power to do that very easily. But notice how many times faithfulness is mentioned in this. The disciples failed this test of faith. Right after hearing Jesus speak about the parables of the kingdom and having them explained to them, they failed this test of faith. They had great knowledge of the word, but they had little active faith. Little active faith. They were afraid. They were afraid. I'm going to go back to Psalms again for a moment. Psalms 56. In verse 3. When I am afraid, I will trust in you. And Isaiah 12. Isaiah 12 and verse 2. Behold, God is my salvation. I will trust and not be afraid. The disciples were afraid. Terrified, actually. Even though Jesus was right there. The disciples had unbelief. Unbelief, which made them afraid. And what does the Bible say about unbelief? You see that in Hebrews 3. In verse 12. Beware, brethren, lest perhaps there be in any of you an evil heart of unbelief and apostatizing from the living God. An evil heart of unbelief because you fail to trust God. Your faith is little. Your heart has unbelief because you have little faith. You don't trust in God. When God says, is going to do something, you'll do it. Now, an interesting note too, remember I said that word rebuked? Well, I read it. Jesus rebuked the wind. Was Satan responsible for that storm? The use of the word rebuke gives you a clue. It's very possible. It doesn't actually state that, but it's quite possible, and in fact, quite likely, for a couple of reasons. Jesus calmed the storm by rebuking it. The word rebuke, when you look it up in the dictionary, says to express sharp, stern disapproval of, reprove, or reprimand. Why would it be reprimanding wind? More like reprimanding Satan. Expressing sharp or stern disapproval of what Satan was doing, rebuking him. And immediately he left and the sea was calm. Now, another interesting way to think about that is that it was quite possible and quite likely that Satan was responsible for this storm. Where was Jesus headed at that time? Why was he going to the other side of the lake? What was his mission going to be? Well, we'll see. Let's find out what he was about to do. Matthew 8, verse 28. And when he had come to the other side into the country of the Gergesenes, there met him 2 who were possessed by demons, coming out of the tombs, so violent that no one was able to pass by that way. Immediately, when they got across there, well, maybe not immediately, but soon after, they encounter these 2 individuals possessed by demons. Now, if Satan was responsible for that storm, it's logical that he was trying to stop them from getting there, because he obviously wouldn't have wanted these 2 men to lose their demon possession, which was going to happen anyway. Luke 8, verse 26. Then they sailed down to the country of the Gadarenes, I can't say those things, which is across from Galilee. And when he went out on the land, there met him a certain man from the city who had been possessed by demons for a long time. And he was not wearing any clothes, and did not dwell in a house, but in the tombs. It's curious statements. I'll read one more account of that in Mark 5. And they came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gadarenes. And as soon as he had left the ship, there met him from out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit, who had his dwelling among the tombs, and no one had the power to restrain him, even with chains. For he had often been bound with fetters and chains, but the chains had been torn to pieces by him, and the fetters had been shattered, and no one had the strength to subdue him. And continually, night and day, in the mountains and in the tombs, he was screaming and cutting himself with stones. Did you notice the difference in these 3 accounts? In Matthew, we read about 2 men possessed by demons, and in Luke and Mark, we hear about 1 man. Why the difference? There was 2. Matthew stated that. But why would Luke and Mark talk about just the 1? What would be a logical reason for that? The logical reason for that would be, even though there was 2 possessed by demons, one of them was far more vocal than the other. And that was the one that Jesus addressed directly and that the disciples wrote about. Matthew continually referred to both of them, but Luke and Mark referred to the one that was more vocal. Is the logical explanation for the difference in those. Let's go back to Matthew 8, verse 29. And they, notice they, and they cried out at once, saying, "What do you have to do with us, Jesus, the Son of God? Have you come here to torment us before the time?" What are two important things that you can glean from that verse here? One is that these demons in this man, or these two men, recognized Jesus Christ as the Son of God. They recognized him. They knew him before. They knew who he was. And they called out to him. And they also said, "Have you come here to torment us before the time?" What time?
The second resurrection.
What does the second resurrection have to do with demons, though?
Well, we put away the good.
That happens before the second resurrection, between the first and the second, yes. But yeah, the time of their final judgment is what that's referring to, yes. Torment us before the time. I went into a sermon about that once on the Day of Atonement, if you remember that, about their time and their final judgment. And Luke 8, verse 28. Now when he saw Jesus, he cried out, he, not they, he, the more vocal one. And when he saw Jesus, he cried out and fell down in front of him. Why would he fall down in front of him? Because he was the Son of God. There was still respect. And he said it with a loud voice, "Why do you have, or what do you have to do with me, Jesus, Son of God, of the Most High? I beseech you, do not torment me." Remember that word, beseech. Earnestly asking. Please don't do anything bad to me right now before my time. I still have time, right? It's not my time. Or it's not our time. Why are you here before me, Jesus? Have you come to judge me now or judge us now? The demons had a lot of belief, didn't they, in the existence of God, for one, and their power, their authority, the Father and the Son, and also about judgment. They knew a judgment was coming. Knowing these things didn't save them from their fate, though. Their fate was already sealed. But lessons can be learned about that with us too. Do you really believe that there is a Father in heaven and the Son of God who died for you? Do you really believe that? Do you believe they have the authority to raise you from the dead and to glorify you like them? Do you really believe that? And do you really believe that a judgment known as the second death can happen to you if you have unbelief, and that unbelief turns you from God? Do you really believe that? The demons believe. And in Mark 5, go back there again. But when he saw Jesus from afar, he recognized Jesus from a long way away. The Son of God, from far away. He recognized him. He ran. He fell down before him, or worshipped him, and pleaded, crying out with a loud voice. He said, "What have I to do with you, Jesus, Son of God, the Most High? I adjure you, by God, I adjure you, by God, do not torment me." What does adjure mean? To charge, bind, or command earnestly and solemnly, or request earnestly or solemnly. You were asking Jesus earnestly, asking him, "Don't torment us now, please. It's not our time. Have you come to do this?" They fully understood what Jesus can do, through the Father's power, of course. For he, Jesus, was saying to it, "Unclean spirit, come out of the man." And he asked it, "What is your name?" And it answered, "My name is Legion, because we are many." Luke 8:29. For he had commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man. For many times it had seized him, and each time he was restrained being bound with chains and fetters. But after breaking the bonds, he was driven by the demon into the desert. And Jesus asked it, saying, "What is your name?" And it said, Legion, because many demons had entered into him. Legion. How many soldiers are in a Roman legion? Do you know? About 6,000. And these demons, which were many, they called them Legion. Can you imagine being possessed by 6,000 demons? No wonder he was able to break chains, fetters, and bonds. No wonder. No wonder he was shrieking day and night, cutting himself, running around naked. It's no wonder. And I'm sure Satan loved this very thing, that this man was possessed by so many demons. And it would make sense that he would try to stop Jesus from going there and casting these demons out, does it not? 6,000. Another thing to consider is, where are these types of demons today? Are they around? Are people possessed today? That's also logical to assume. But the world doesn't recognize it as such, generally. It's been said, people and missionaries have encountered many people that are so tormented that the only logical explanation is demon possession for them. Although the medical community would probably call it insanity. Demon possession is more likely, though. Not that every insane person is demon possessed, mind you. It's not one and the same. But there is evidence out there. And people are doing things right now with the power of Satan. It's been suggested by some that some of the magicians out there, right, that do incredible things that seem impossible, are actually doing them by the power of Satan. Well, that doesn't mean all magicians out there necessarily, because the vast majority of them are doing simple tricks and illusions that can be easily explained. But there are things that are unexplainable. I saw a video clip of one where a man was walking on a river. Walking on the river. a long way too. About a half mile, 3/4 of a mile, until a police boat picked him up. Now how could a man do that? How could he indeed? There's only one explanation for that. Luke 8, verse 31. Then it begged him that he would not command them to go away into the abyss. Abyss? What abyss? What abyss is he talking about? Revelation 20. Do you remember that? Keep my hands in these other parts here. Revelation 20, verse 1. Then I saw an angel descending from heaven, having the key of the abyss, and a great chain in his hand. And he took hold of the dragon, the ancient serpent, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. And he cast him into the abyss, and locked him up, and sealed the abyss over him, so that he would not deceive the nations any longer until the 1,000 years were fulfilled. And after that, it is ordained that he be loosed for a short time. There is a place that Jesus can and does cast demons, known as the abyss, a place of restraint, where they are removed from influencing the world. And this demon was asking about the abyss. Or he begged him, don't command me to go into the abyss. Or don't command us to go into the abyss. That's a real place. It's not known as hell, like some people think. Mark 5, verse 10. And it begged him again and again that he would not send them out of the country. That's an odd word. I'm not sure why it's translated that way. Matthew 8:31. And the demons pleaded with him, saying, if you cast us out, allow us to go into the herd of swine. And he said to them, go. And after coming out, they went into the herd of swine, and the entire herd of swine suddenly rushed down the steep slope into the sea and died in the waters. Luke 8:32. Now there was a herd of many swine feeding there on the mountain, and they begged him that he would allow them to enter into the swine, and he gave them permission. And the demons went out of the man and entered into the swine, and the whole herd rushed headlong down the steep slope into the lake and were drowned. In Mark 5:11. Now near the mountain there was a large herd of swine feeding. And all the demons pleaded with him, saying, send us to the swine, so that we may enter into them. Then Jesus immediately permitted them to go. And the unclean spirits went out of the man and entered into the swine. And the herd stampeded down the steep slope into the sea. Now they were about 2,000, and they all drowned in the sea. 2,000 pigs possessed by demons now. That's a lot of pigs. There's a lot of demons too. Probably 6,000, or about that number. Why did Jesus grant their request about being cast into the pigs, or going into the pigs, and not casting them into the abyss? Obviously, Jesus could have cast them into the abyss too, or commanded them to go into the abyss, could he have not? Otherwise, the demons would have not pleaded with him so earnestly not to do that. And are you here to do this before our time? Well, he could have done that. But he allowed them to go into that herd of swine. Possibly, it was to show the witnesses around how great a torment this man or these two men were under. And you can see the miraculous change in them and what happened to the pigs. A great example of God's power over Satan. That's possible. That's a logical assumption. But it's not necessarily fact. Right? It's a logical assumption as to why Jesus allowed them to go into the pigs. In verse 33 of Matthew 8, but those who were tending those pigs, fled, and after going into the city reported everything and what had happened to those who had been possessed by demons. And the entire city went out to meet Jesus, and when they saw him, they besought him to depart their borders. Well, that's curious. Those who were tending the pigs fled and went to report about it. I'm sure they didn't want to get blamed for the death of these 2,000 pigs, which had a large economical impact, right? I'm not responsible for that. I'm sure that's what their intention was when they fled and went and told everyone. But why, when the entire city came out to meet Jesus to see what it was about, that they wanted him to go, to leave? Luke 8, verse 34. Now when those who were feeding the swine saw what had taken place, they fled, and they went and reported it to the city and to the country. And those who heard went out to see what had taken place. And they came to Jesus and found the man from whom the demons had gone out, clothed and of a sound mind, seated at Jesus' feet, and they were afraid. Why were they afraid? And those who had seen it related to them how the one who had been possessed by demons was healed. Then all the multitude of the Gadarenes from the country around asked him to depart from them, for they were filled with great fear. And he went into the ship to return. They were filled with great fear. Fear of what? Interesting question. Mark 5, verse 14. And those who were feeding the swine fled in fear. In fear of what? In fear of being blamed for it, probably, and reported it to the city and in the country. Then they went out to see what it was about, what had been done. And they came to Jesus and saw the man who had been possessed by demons, the one who had the legion, sitting and clothed and of a sound mind, and they were afraid. Then those who had seen it reported to them what had happened to the one who had been possessed by demons and the things concerning the swine. And they began to urge him to depart from their borders. Great fear of what? What were they fearful about? Were they afraid of this man, Jesus? Possibly. Possibly. Maybe, perhaps, it was because they had lost about 2,000 pigs. And if you're a farmer and you lose an entire herd like that, what have you lost? A lot of cash, haven't you? Maybe they were fearful about being hurt even more economically. Perhaps he might do something else and might lose a whole herd of cattle or whatever. That's entirely possible. Because why would they fear Jesus when he healed these two individuals like that? Instead of marveling, they were fearful. Fearful of what, though? And wanted this man, Jesus, to leave them. That's astonishing when you think about it. We're almost done. In Luke 8, verse 38. Where are we here? And the man from whom the demons had gone out begged to be taken with him, to become one of his disciples. But Jesus sent him away, saying, "Return to your own house and declare all that God has done for you." And he went through the whole city, proclaiming all that Jesus had done for him. And in Mark 5, verse 18, and when he boarded the ship, the one who had been possessed by demons begged him that he might be with him. But Jesus did not permit him. Rather, he said to him, "Go to your house and to your own, and tell them how much the Lord has done for you, and how he has pitied you." Then he departed and began to proclaim in Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and all were amazed. Why wouldn't Jesus allow him to be one of his disciples? It's not entirely clear what Jesus' motives were as to why he wouldn't allow him to be one of his disciples if this man desired so. But we can assume that Jesus thought a better witness and better work of God would be done by sending this man back to his people, because he had been tormented for a long time by this great many demons, and everybody knew, and they even chained him, tried to restrain him, and it wouldn't work. They feared this man. What great wonder, what great testimony could this man give? And he did, because all were amazed in his own town, in his own country. So he was doing God's work in that land, in his own country. And I'm sure if some of these people hadn't been converted after Christ died, and the disciples were preaching and baptizing 3,000 one day, 5,000 another, maybe some of these people were involved in that and being converted, perhaps. But if not, in the second resurrection, again, wouldn't it be easy for these people who witnessed this to be converted and to be convinced? You always have to keep that kind of thing in mind when you do witness for Christ, that the fruit may not be harvested in the first resurrection, but it may be harvested in the second resurrection from the work that you are doing now. Always keep that in mind. It's never a bad time to witness for Jesus. Okay.